All right, we're in Matthew chapter 5 this morning. About halfway through, we'll be down to, begin in just a moment, verse 27. This is Jesus' segment here we call the Sermon on the Mount. The 3 chapters of Matthew 5, 6, and 7. That he lays out his view of the kingdom of heaven. Lays out his goal, his mission to the people. And as we know, the people that heard him here on the side of the hill were not the influencers. They weren't the important people. They weren't the religious leaders. They were common folk. The ones he had healed. The ones that were poor. The ones that were needy. And he just has had his Beatitudes, the 8 blessings upon them. And now he goes into a section of saying, but what I call you to do is going to have to be more righteous than these self-righteous Pharisees that you see parading around here. Your righteousness is going to have to exceed that to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he talks about a lot of that. Last week we looked at his call for us to be salt of the earth, to be light, to be an influencer, as we might say, for good. And he talked about his view of the law, that he was not there to do away with the law, but to fulfill it, to bring it to full fruition and completeness and wholeness. And last week we ended up talking about his prohibition against murder, because it begins in your heart. You can do things just as bad without the actual act of murder if your heart is turned in that direction. All right, in verse 27, he calls us again to a higher standard in our moral life dealing with adultery. And we'll read verses 27 through 30 of Matthew chapter 5. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. As we know, one of the 10 Commandments was, thou shalt not commit adultery. We know that God has called us for holiness in our marriage. From Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve was created, he called them together to be one flesh. Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and is joined to his wife, and they become one flesh, one unit, one family for procreation. God calls us for fidelity in marriage. He calls us for devotion. And he wants that standard held, if at all possible. Now, whenever Jesus begins in verse 27 here, he says, you have heard it said, and that was a referral to all the great rabbis of the day that taught and expounded on what they thought the laws of the Old Testament meant. And he sort of referenced that. But then he always says, but I tell you this. And that's a major statement, because that implies he's speaking for God, and in fact, he is God. He is the Son of God. And that's what rankled the Jewish authorities, because they said, who is this guy? He talks as if he's coming from God. And we know he can't be, because we knew his parents. Who is this guy? Who do you think he is? But Jesus says, I tell you that you can have a corrupt heart and have adulterous thoughts, improper thoughts, even without doing the act, if you so choose to go that way. You see, the Jewish law, bingo, it's either black or white. You either did it or not. Jesus calls us to a higher standard. Your righteousness has got to be above those teachers of the law, the Pharisees. You've got to be better than that. I call you to a higher standard. You got to look what's in your heart. And if you, in your heart, basically say, if I could, I would, then that's the same thing. And he says, that is bad. You don't do that. That is not proper. And then he says, I don't mince words here. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble in a general way, gouge it out. If your right arm causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to be maimed in life than to go into the gates of hell as a whole body. Jesus says, whatever it takes, at all costs, I want you to be holy. God calls us to be holy. That is one of the repetitive phrases of the Old Testament. God says, since I am holy, I want you to be holy. Be ye holy as I am holy, he says. And Jesus says, don't make excuses like, oh, I couldn't help myself. I'm a victim. I was entrapped. It was not my fault. No. He says, stop it. Your eye, your arm, whatever it takes. Do what it takes to live a holy life. Jesus calls us, calls these people as well as us to a high standard here. All right. That's our thought on the calling to adultery, against adultery. Any thought, comment here? All right, we'll continue on. Now, sort of associated with the same idea is now the marriage bond and how we discuss that. Divorce. This is verse 31 and 32. He says, now it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. The Old Testament said you can divorce basically for whatever reason you want to. The standard was not very high in the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy. It just says if you divorce your wife for whatever reason, you got to give her a certificate. And that was an advancement because before that, I suppose, if you wanted to split up, you just sort of abandoned each other, and one went one way and one went the other, and no one ever really knew, am I really divorced or separated or whatever. In that day, the law of Moses said, no, if you split up, you divorce, give each other a certificate so that we know who's married and who's not. That was an advancement for what was being done. And the Jews were so proud of that. You know, we give a writ of divorcement. See, we're good Jews. Jesus says, yes, you've heard that. I know that. But I say, the standard for staying together in marriage is very high. And he says, you stay together unless it's broken by the fragmentation of infidelity. Basically the same as death. When a partner is unfaithful, when a partner breaks the marriage vow, the marriage oath, then that can be grounds, if you cannot reconcile, then for divorce. You see, whenever we get married, we have a wedding ceremony, and we're very much into that. That's wonderful. It's good to honor the institution of marriage. The white dress and the guys in their suits and maybe tuxedos or whatever is appropriate, and the beautiful flowers, beautiful music, the beautiful punch bowl and everything. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But the core that we sometimes fail to emphasize is our marriage vow. That's an oath. That's a contract. That's a swearing before God and mankind that I take this person to be my lawfully wedded husband or wife till death do us part. And we know the phrases, till, for richer or poorer, for sickness and death, till death do us part. And we don't have to talk very long to understand that that doesn't last very much anymore. That we see the breakup of marriage for sometimes such trivial reasons. Jesus calls us to a higher standard. He says, your righteousness must be more than these great self-righteous Jews here. Jesus calls us for purity in marriage. And he says, my standard is this. Now, when we look at this, I don't know how all this works in God's eyes when we fail. We look at God's model, we look at God's ideal, and yet we know that that is sometimes not upheld. And we'll have to deal with that in the right way. All right, this is our scripture from Jesus. Any comment or any question here on divorce in marriage?
Well, it sounds like the certificate's not going to do the woman any good, because if she gets married again, she's considered an adulteress.
Now, yeah, that's sort of confusing. If she were the guilty party, she's considered an adulteress already.
Okay.
And I think that what he means is if she gets married, she would be considered adulteress only if she had been the guilty party. I don't know.
Okay.
That's not a blanket statement that any divorced woman that remarries is an adulteress. No, that's not what he's meaning there at all. But I had to wrestle with that, Eula. I had to read it and reread it.
Well, I was trying to figure out which one was the one that was unfaithful.
Yes.
He or she. So.
Yes. So, yeah.
Well, it's kind of, when you read about what would be the cause of a divorce before Jesus said these things. I mean, I can remember reading a guy could divorce his wife, and this is Jewish, if she was just loud in the streets, if she was just a really loud woman, and he didn't like that, he could divorce her with the certificate.
Or say I divorce you 3 times and for
Yeah,
whatever reason.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And another one was burned as toast. Whatever. And we laugh at that, And I see the sadness of well, we don't call them this anymore, but broken homes. Broken homes. And there's kiddos involved. And it's just so sad. It's so sad. God calls us to the ideal. And we strive for that ideal. But we know sometimes it just doesn't happen. That's sad. Anything else? Yes, sir.
The Bible clearly says that God hates divorce,
Yes.
but he does not hate the divorced person. And sometimes we get confused about
Yes.
that, because under the law of grace, there is forgiveness,
Yes.
and his grace is greater than we can comprehend.
Yes.
And the divorced person that has gone through that needs to accept God's grace and forgiveness and move on.
Yes, yes. Sometimes we think that God is more likely to forgive a murder than a divorce. If God can forgive a murderer, He can forgive those of us who fail in marriage as well. Yes. God, well, I'm a little reluctant to speak for God. I'll let His Scripture do that. But God understands. God understands us. And He reaches out to us. Okay. All right. Well, it's just so sad, and I'll say it again, it's just so sad to see the marriage bond almost to be trivialized these days. To say, if it doesn't work out, we can go a different direction. And how it affects the kiddos. It's so sad. All right, we'll move on. What about swearing of oaths? That's our next section. All right, let's read verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by the earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. And anything beyond this comes from the evil one. All right. What they're talking about here is swearing an oath that I'm going to do something. And an oath is sort of an appeal to a higher power or higher authority, usually God, to witness that I said this, that I'm going to do it. And sometimes we may hear the phrase, as the Lord lives, I'm going to do this. As the Lord liveth, I swear to do this. Or, with God as my witness, I declare that I will do thus and so. Whenever this was written, again, the Jewish nitpickers, the Jewish authorities, had it all figured out, a scheme of how you could sort of swear by something and then sort of default on your promise by saying, well, the thing I swore over is really not any good. I swear by the temple of God that I will do this or that. And then when you don't do it, when I don't do it, then I can claim, well, the temple is just a building, it's just some rocks, it's just, that's not important, so I'm out of this. And as good swindlers go, as good false people do, they're looking for any way out of their word or their contract. Con men, as we call them, confidence people that want to swindle people and all that. This is sort of the racket that was going in here under the name of the law of Moses, under God's name. And this is sick. This is bad. Jesus says, now you have heard that you don't break your oath. Do what you're supposed to do. But Jesus says, I tell you, you don't swear at all. You don't have to. You don't swear by heaven or earth or Jerusalem. Don't even swear by your own head, because you don't have even no control over that. He's not saying don't swear at all, just don't swear falsely. the answer? Just be a yes or no, period. Just be truthful, yes or no, and go on with it. You don't have to mess around and have to swear by the great city Jerusalem that I'm going to, pay you back on Tuesday. He says, just do it. Just say it and just do it. And that was their situation here. Now, God calls us to tell the truth all the time. One of the 10 Commandments, likewise, was don't bear false witness against your neighbor. That's hard for us to understand, to bear false witness, meaning to lie about something to your neighbor. Again, this is one of the points of the 10 Commandments. He says, don't do that. Now, whenever we go to court, sometimes there's a question, are we supposed to swear? Jesus says don't swear. No, he's not talking about that. There's nothing at all wrong with us raising our hand on the Bible or whatever, say, with God as my witness, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That is fine. You remember when Jesus was on trial the night before he was crucified. He was before the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, and the high priest says, I adjure you by the oath of this court to tell me, are you the Son of God? And of course Jesus said, well, you say so. But see, Jesus didn't object to being sworn under oath to respond. He just responded as he needed to. So we're not talking here about not swearing in court or anything like that. Jesus' point is to say, you be honest, you be truthful, always, all the time, period. And that's it. End of story. All right. Any comment or question here on oaths taking? Yes, sir, Dr. May.
This brings me back to my upbringing. My dad always raised me as I started to work that my word was my bond. I did not need a contract. I didn't, if I said I would do something for X dollars, my word was my bond.
Yes.
I have become cynical the last 18 months, but in a building project, I've had multiple occasions, when people would tell me something and not live up to it.
Yes. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And as we said, we mourn over things in our lives that we have seen taking a downward spiral in the last years. One is responsibility to keep your word. Number 2 is divorce. Number 3 is abortion. Number 4 is drugs. We mourn over that. And yet we look to the other side to say, God help us. May we be salt. May we be light. May we be an influence around us to help us back up. And yes, we mourn with you, Dr. May, about the failures of life. Yes. All right. Any other thing? All right, verse 38. Now this is about revenge or retribution or payback, as we would say. Verse 38, he says, now, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go with them 1 mile, you go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. All right, whenever we read in the Old Testament, we know that some of their laws were very, very harsh and brutal and strict, and a little bit much for us. One of them was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And of course, I always thought that meant equal payback. Meaning, if I knocked out your tooth, you can knock my tooth out. Or if I poked out your eye, you can poke mine out. That's sort of what I thought it meant, and that does begin the thinking there. But the real reason that was in the Old Testament is to bring down escalating payback or escalating violence or retribution by one person getting back at the other, and the other person saying, well, I'm not going to take that, I'm going to get back at him again, and then goes back to the other side even worse, and the other side even worse, and you know how payback begins to escalate into an absolute war. Retribution. Someone says, what is it, sweet retribution or sweet payback? There's nothing sweet about it. Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth said, you get justice equal as you see and stop it. Well, the idea here is that Jesus said, now you've heard it say, follow the law and you get your payback, you get justice, and make sure you get it. But he says, I tell you, go the second mile. Let people have your coat if they need it. Give people that are needy something to eat if they need it. You go over yourself. You bend backwards, as we would say, to help people that have not been nice to you. Do that. That squashes the escalation of ugliness. Squashes the wanting to get payback and retribution and revenge. You know, oh my, revenge is so poisonous. It poisons our soul to carry a grudge and to look for revenge. You know, that's the old idea of the westerns, you know, of Roy Rogers and John Wayne and all that. You know, revenge of the cowboys and the bank robbers and the who hung who yesterday and all that. We say, oh, that was yesterday, and yet we have it in our own lives. We can hold revenge, and that just poisons us. Jesus says, forgive as I have forgiven you. And so whenever we talk about revenge and retribution and payback, no, that's not in our vocabulary. Jesus says, if you have to take your licking, take it and go on. Now he gives 4 examples here. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn them the other cheek also. Now, I often understood that as if that were, you know, the John Wayne hitting you on his cheek and all that. It's not. I think it's referring to their way of greeting each other in that portion of the country at that time, as even today. The greeting between, especially for men, is not so much a handshake, but a peck on the cheek. You've seen these guys on TV, the 2 bearded Middle Eastern guys coming up and meeting together, and they have a little peck on each cheek. Grizzled beards, and I would much rather shake hands than do that, and I'm glad our custom is to shake hands. But that is their traditional greeting. And if you didn't do that, and you sort of gave him the back of your hand instead of the peck on the cheek, one on one side, one on the other, instead of that, you just sort of waved you off, that was an extreme insult. That was extreme rudeness. It was like us saying, no, I'm not going to shake your hand and put our hands behind our back. It's probably what Jesus is referring to here, not a slug of trying to fight you. It was just a very major rebuff and rejection. If someone rejects you like that, that's okay. I got another cheek over here if you want to slap me that way. And if you want to take my shirt as a fine or penalty of some way, then if you need my coat, take it also. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Well, at that day and time, the Roman soldiers were authorized to make civilians carry their gear for a mile. And Jesus says, if that happens, just say, thank you very much, I'll go another mile if you need me to. And that's, heaping coals of fire upon their head. What's wrong with these people? Instead of being mad at me, they want to go the 2nd mile. Jesus is talking about a transformed heart here, a transformed inside. He says, do that. And don't be stingy. Give to people who need something from you. And this is not a license to give every street hustler in Waco with a sign, $50. No, not at all. He's talking about the truly needy that are needy because of no fault of their own and they have no way out. He says, help them. This is the way you need to be. Your righteousness has got to be more than the great Jewish leaders that have held you down for so long. Your righteousness has got to exceed them. Now, whenever we think about this, we have a word today that's going around called social justice. What's right, what's wrong? And we look around and we see social injustice, yes. We know our history. We can look back at things that happened in America that we're very ashamed of, that were wrong. How do we make it right? How do we make it better? How do we move forward? That's our own decision on how to do that. God calls us, each one of us individually, to be a welcoming heart to anybody that needs us in the path of life, the fellow travelers along, to have a helping hand. We go the 2nd mile. We give them our shirt. We give them whatever, so to speak, figuratively speaking, to move forward. And I don't know how to solve all the problems of the world in that regard, but God calls each one of us to be that way in our hearts. So let's remember that as Jesus calls us. An eye for an eye, yet on the other side, go the 2nd mile. Okay. Let me pause here. Any thought or comment on this idea?
I think the major problem with that nowadays is when you do that, people think you're weak.
Yes, you're weak.
And they judge you in that way.
And they take advantage of you.
Yes,
Right.
they do.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yes, sir, Dr. May.
Does the golden rule pertain to everybody?
Yes. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto
You would
you.
have them do unto you.
Yes.
So if they do something unto you, does that give you the right to do unto them as they did unto you?
And as far as revenge goes, I would say no.
You know, the Eastern teaching was, if you're going to go down the road of vengeance, first dig 2 graves.
Okay? All right? If you're going to go down the road of vengeance, first dig 2 graves. I had not heard that. Yes. Well, you know, you turn on the TV and you look at the latest gun violence, just any day almost.
Yesterday.
You know, one gang member is shot. Well, that gang gets mad, and so we're going to get retribution. And so they're going to kill one of theirs, but they kill 2 or 3. And then this gang has the payback next week. You know how it goes. And there we go.
And the 5-year-old kid in between gets killed.
Yes. Yes, the innocent bystanders get killed. It's awful. It's awful.
Well, since God's children were led into Palestinian territory way back when, there's certainly been retribution back and forth between those two
Yes.
groups that we never end.
Yes, yes, yes. In the Middle East, they've been throwing rocks at each other for thousands of years, and I'm afraid it's not gonna stop easily. Yes. All right, speaking of that, Jesus says, love your enemies. Oh, no. We can't do that. We're supposed to get revenge. We're supposed to pay them back. Jesus says, love your enemies, verse 43. You've heard it was said, love your enemies, and love your neighbors, and hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? You need to be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, in the Old Testament law, it told us to love our neighbor. Love our neighbor. Now, it didn't ask us to hate our enemies, because that comes naturally, right? We don't have to work at hating our enemies. That just comes with the territory. That's the natural instinct. Payback, as we just called it. But Jesus says, I tell you, don't hate your enemies, but love them and pray for them. Now we say, no, I can't love them, I can't like them. No, it's not a feeling. This is a fact. This is a decision of our mind. It says, I want my enemies not to be my enemies. I want them to straighten up and do right, act right, and be good people. As much as they've done me wrong, I know that, I accept that, but I pray the best for my enemies. And that's difficult to do, and that's what we read Scripture, heaping coals of fire upon your head, as Paul puts it, when we do good to people who have done us bad. Meaning, that doesn't make sense. And that's our phrase. And he says, look, you do good to all people because God does good to all people in the sense of letting the sun rise, set every day on everybody, and makes the rain come to the just and the unjust, to everybody. I want you to consider that as well. If God can blanketly bless all people in that regard, you should too. All right, our time's up. Any quick comment or question on that? All right, very good. Thank you. We'll be dismissed.
Thank you.